this will be kind of a two-part presentation. I'm going to kick things off, and then about halfway through, I'm going to pass the baton to Paul. So I'm going to cover some of the background and foundational information specifically related to the physiological determinants of rowing performance. So just briefly, a little bit about myself, if you're not familiar with myself or Science of Rowing. Third-year PhD student at the University of Kansas in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Laboratory. Also part of the female athlete program out of Boston Children's Hospital. And then previously, I was a head strength and conditioning coach for the Portuguese Rowing Federation from 2018 to the conclusion of the Tokyo Olympic cycle. And then as of last year, I've been providing strength and conditioning support to U.S. Rowing's para rowers, as well as assisting at some of the high altitude training camps. And my other co-host this afternoon is Dr. Paul Laursen. Paul has an extensive background in endurance sport. So from 2009 to 2016, he was part of High Performance Sport New Zealand as a program manager, working with a variety of sports, but definitely one we're all appreciative of, the sport of rowing. In addition to that, he has written and coached and spoken extensively on high intensity interval training, and no hyperbole, he's written the book on it. So we've got a world-leading expert with us this afternoon. And then most recently, Paul is one of the co-founders of Athletica. And Athletica is a platform that uses artificial intelligence to help provide individualized program to each athlete. So as your... Sorry, was that a question? Okay. It helps to provide individualized programming to athletes. As you're inputting and uploading your training data, it continues to learn and evolve. So the more data that is brought into the system, the better the training program can be. And it's specifically focused on the endurance sport population, so running, cycling, triathlon, and rowing. And this webinar, we're kicking off our partnership together. So this is the first of many collaborations, but myself and Paul are absolutely thrilled to be teaming up this afternoon and presenting this material to you. And we're looking forward to bringing more educational content in the coming months. So stay tuned. So what you can expect to learn over the course of this webinar from us this afternoon. So we're going to define what is high intensity rowing. I'll go over some of the energy system contributions to 2,000 meter racing. What is the foundation of power? The importance and details around force characteristics across 2,000 meter racing, and how that integrates into coordination, technical development, and skill, and how we can transfer that into training and racing. So what do we mean by high intensity rowing? We want to focus on creating faster boat speed by either increasing stroke rate and power per stroke. So either of those two variables or a combination of both of them. And a huge outcome measure that we're focused on developing is to develop the anaerobic capabilities. And you can see in this short video on the loop, there's some start sequences by the Chinese national team, video courtesy of my colleague, Alex Wolf. So when we look at the energy system contributions for rowing across 2,000 meters, depending on where you're reading in the literature, it's usually quantified between 70 to 77% aerobic and 23 to 30% anaerobic. And I'm of the opinion at this point in my career that the anaerobic contributions probably actually at least 30%, and it has a much bigger impact not only on training but racing, and we probably don't do it enough service. So when we look at the context of rowing, all right, power is a key determinant, and that earlier slide that we looked at high intensity training or high intensity interval training, We looked at increasing power or stroke rate. So when we break power down, it's force times velocity. And so one of those key physical characteristics that we're going to take a look at and talk about this afternoon is force, right? And so force can be expressed in many different ways, but the foundation underneath of force and other physical characteristics like velocity or power is strength. And strength is the ability of the body to produce force to overcome inertia or load. And one of the key characteristics for rowing performance is the development and expression of maximal force, which we can define as the maximum amount of force a muscle or muscle groups can generate. So we go back to that equation of power. We look at force times velocity. From a strength and conditioning perspective, like one of my jobs and my roles is to help increase that ceiling of force expression for the rowing athlete. So that can be expressed in the rowing context, whether that's on the water in the rowing shell or on the ergometer. So why is force important? So this data is from a 1993 on-water study by World Rowing Medical Chair Jürgen Steinacker. And so they looked at elite male single scullers, and these are the peak forces, so the highest forces recorded across a 2,000-meter race. So you can see off the start, boats at a dead stop, that's where the forces are going to be highest across 2,000 meters. So elite male scullers are producing between 1,000 to 1,500 newtons of force. And then that kind of comes down through the middle 1,000 and then bumps back up during the sprint. All right, so that just gives you an idea of the sustained force output across a 2,000-meter distance, right, and why it's important. A more recent study out of the Victorian Institute of Sport in Australia looked at men's and women's singles and coxless pairs. And so this looked at the average force across 2,000 meters. So you can see as the boat class got bigger, right, that mean force went up. So we don't have data yet on it, but I would anticipate that if we went up to a quad or a coxless 4 or cox 4 or the 8, that these mean forces would also increase, right? So it's becoming, the picture is becoming quite clear that there is a high relative degree of force necessary for successful rowing performance. And so that's one part of the equation for power. And then this slide looks at impulse, right? So the area under the curve. And what's really interesting is that international rowers produce a greater area under the curve, okay? So while the national level rowers have a higher peak, you can see it tops out a little bit higher. The way that the international rowers express force is actually over either a longer period of time or on the right, it shows a greater degrees, right? So they're covering through their stroke, they're covering a larger area. I just ask if you can please just mute yourself if you haven't already done so. Thank you. So how much time does it take to produce force in the rowing stroke? So that same study from Victorian Institute of Sport, they had time to peak force across those 4 boat classes was 0.36 to 0.43 seconds. So we know that we need to produce high levels of force and sustain that across 2,000 meters, but the rate of force development, how quickly we produce that, is also an important characteristic of rowing performance. But there are some pitfalls that we need to avoid. And what I mean by that is that rowing at, say, mid stroke ratings, you know, your 24 to 26 strokes per minute versus 36 to 38, it's all rowing. It's the rowing stroke, but the rate, the magnitude, and the timing of muscle contraction is very different at those stroke ratings. And so we can't make the assumption that if we're training at those lower stroke ratings, it's immediately we're going to transfer to our race power output and our race cadence. And there's also an important technical component. which, if we're not spending higher time in training at higher stroke rates, that we may not be as efficient and smooth technically. So those are just some of the additional considerations when it comes to high intensity interval training from a biomechanical standpoint. So I'm going to, at this point, stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Paul, and Paul's going to take us away.
Fantastic, Joe. I'm just going to look for that. There's the share. Hey, just a reminder, everyone who's listening, unfortunately, when you came in, we weren't able to hit the setting where you were able to mute you as you come in. So there's still a lot of people that we can hear. So if you can just check that you are muted, we would be grateful for that. Thank you. Okay. Can you see my screen there, Joe?
Yes, but it's not in presenter view yet.
Perfect.
You're good
How
now.
about now? Good to go?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, again, as Joe mentioned, really grateful for the collaboration, become partners with you, Joe, with Science of Rowing. I'm Paul Laursen from Athletica and HIIT Science. And yeah, it was, as Joe mentioned, very lucky to have a smart colleague in Martin Bichite to write a textbook on the science and application of high intensity interval training. And that's really, I guess, the backbone of the courses that we offer with HIIT Science and also the AI that's behind Athletica. And I think we're one of the first movers to the world of rowing. So please check us out, athletica.ai, if you're a rower and or a rower coach. So we have both a coach platform and an athlete platform, and this is where we apply everything. So who is Paul Laursen? Where am I kind of coming from? So I've got basically about a 30-year. I'm coming to you from the ski town of Revelstoke. We just got a 30 centimeters of fresh overnight, but I'm way more excited to be inside here with you guys. Um, but yeah, I'm a kind of a British Columbia boy, but I did 30 years sort of down under in Australia with my PhD down there, working with the Australian Institute of Sport, and then over to New Zealand as well, working with High Performance Sport New Zealand across various different sports and including rowing, but did the majority of writing HIIT Science, Athletica, back here where I'm at in Revelstoke, BC. So we'll start just at the basics. We're going to talk about, what is high intensity interval training to begin with. And just so everyone is clear, high intensity interval training it's defined as repeated bouts of exercise in your red zone with recovery between those. So as most on the call will know, when we do work in the HIIT format, we can perform more actual total volume of high intensity work than if we were just to row at that high intensity the whole time, right? And we could see, based on the point that Joe just left off on, we don't want to always be rowing at stroke rate of 24. We've got to get into those higher ones, especially if our race is going to be at the higher stroke rates. So and you can almost imagine from the mental standpoint, you want to connect your mind to the force application. We need to break these down to be able to do these types of more work at high intensity ultimately. So we're going to go into the various different types of HIIT sessions, but that you can see them that they're there on the right hand side: long intervals, short intervals, repeated short sprints, repeated long sprints. And when I'm talking to team sport athletes, we also call these small-sided games or game-based high-intensity interval training. One thing I also want to emphasize that I very much realize that even though I'm a specialist in HIIT, it's only one piece of the overall performance puzzle, right? And one of the other big ones is the area that Joe's involved, right, with strength and strength training, and he's just outlined that. So strength is key, mental, tactics, biomechanics, nutrition, on and on it goes. But HIIT is often a very key differentiator of the performance outcome, which is why we've focused on it. In terms of what we recommend coaches and athletes do when they start to think about putting a session on paper, is to think first and foremost about the context. We always say context over the content. So, think about, is this really appropriate right now? Is the type of session that I'm creating right now, is it appropriate to the demands of my sport, to the athlete profile? I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming up. The psychological state of the athlete. Are they actually ready for this? The long-term adaptations that we're trying to create as we progress to Los Angeles, say, for example, the events of the day, the periodization aspects. And then once you know those physiological objectives, then form your content. And that's what we try to do here with HIIT Science. We try to show you the type of content. Or with Athletica, we also show you what the content is that you should be potentially programming in. I love this one. This is by Nader in Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise. And the authors here in this paper, they put all the sports out there, and they showed the different contributions of speed and strength and endurance to performance success. And this was also modified by the authors of HIIT Science. So HIIT Science, it isn't just Martin and I. We start the first 10 chapters, but we have 20 other co-authors that specialize across the various different sports. So Dan Plews for the New Zealand program was our rowing contributor. And, he put the rower right up here in terms of, he's saying that it's more of a strength-based sport relative to speed. But there's also a whole lot of endurance as well, right? And Joe did a nice job kind of outlining those. We need strength to be able to develop max force, because it's an important contributor to power, right? But then of course you can't. I mean, there was still 70% aerobic as well. So it is really, you've got to be ticking all the boxes when it comes down to preparing optimally for your event. Once again, back to HIIT, it's a very versatile format because, as I will show, it has different components of neuromuscular, anaerobic, lactic, or aerobic componentry, depending on how you move the levers of your session. So it's the most versatile of the different formats you could probably do in the week. So we'll start we'll start into chapter 6 when we outline all the chapters of HIIT Science. Like, here's the 10 science chapters, here's the 20 application chapters, but let's just move into chapter 6. And this is where you're integrating your strength training, and you might ask to yourself, well, where do I put that strength training in my week, in my weekly microcycle? Well, chapter 6 gives us some guidelines for that. That's written by Dr. Jackson Fife, who's an expert he did his whole research in this area of concurrent training. Right. So when we first look at the concept of concurrent training, we think of metabolic conditioning first, right? Aerobic training. We think about, what's that going to elicit? Well, we think of oxygen delivery, right? Heart and lungs. We think of the oxygen uptake at the muscular level. We think of the development of mitochondria in the muscles. Of course, this is not always congruent with strength and hypertrophy and power development. So, but that itself is the whole concept of concurrent training. But you as a coach or an athlete, self-coached athlete, you might want, well, how do I curb that into my training to be optimal? And what Jackson and Martin and myself, we kind of come up with at the end of the day is we really need to be thinking about that third component of the HIIT session, the neuromuscular component. The neuromuscular component, like how much you've recruited a certain exercise, the muscle damage that you've maybe created in that, how sore that you actually are. That itself is this so-called interference effect. So you really need to kind of juggle that and think about how you're going to program. And that's going to come back a lot to the individual. But when you think about interplaying your strength session with your metabolic conditioning session, either aerobic or HIIT, think about how much neuromuscular stress is this probably going to cause me. Now, do I want to place that neuromuscular stress on the same day? A lot of coaches do that, and then they have a full day off the next day. Or do I want to space that out? And the answer to that question probably comes down to the individual. Very well trained individuals, they tend to go best on that, just have it all on that kind of one day, but then recover. And then maybe less trained ones, they might need some spacings, but there's lots, as we say in training, there's lots of different ways to skin the cat. When we move into another chapter in, we're backing up now, we're going into the physiological components of HIIT. And I think it may have been Albert Einstein that said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And so we've tried to take HIIT sessions and try to make them as simple as possible to say, okay, there's pretty much 3 key things that you're going to get out of any given HIIT session. There's going to usually be some sort of an aerobic component. There's usually going to be breathing, heavy breathing, large involvement of the heart and lungs. There's usually going to be an anaerobic component that Joe was mentioning about, right? So big lactate response. And then this was the last point that I was drawing on. There's usually going to be a neuromuscular response as well that we need to be aware of. So the HIIT comes with those, but the cool thing about it, depending on how you move the levers, you can get different degrees of those. Okay, so in HIIT science, we kind of code these green, red, and black for aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular in terms of like when we're labeling the various different HIIT sessions, and we label these into HIIT types. Okay, so just think just a little bit of academia, like when we're thinking about the different physiological responses of HIIT, we're thinking about the cardiac output. So this is the power of your heart to deliver that oxygenated blood. So key, and I'm going to show you a case study on an Olympian at the end here where we really looked at that one. But respiratory work as well is key, oxidative function. And then at the muscular level, the peripheral level, we're talking about, how much mitochondria we can generate in both slow twitch muscles and fast twitch muscle fibers. Don't forget those ones adapt aerobically too. All right. And then to the lactate, the anaerobic contribution, right? We're always thinking that lactate is great to have, but this kind of comes back to the Norwegian method. I'm not sure if you're following the Norwegian method much, but Brad Culp does an excellent job to really outline why the Norwegians are getting so much great success, and including their rowers too. And it's all about intensity control. So, how can we continue to get that stimulus that we want to continue to adapt, that consistent training. And if we're killing it and not be able to kind of recover, that we have to be careful there. So they're the artists at their intensity control. They're hitting that target and they're walking away. And that's what we're trying to develop within Athletica. Is that individualized intensity control. So we have to think about glycogen levels, perceived exertion, and the feel for the session too. Usually coupled with the anaerobic component is that neuromuscular one, right? When you're really digging in, there's usually a neuromuscular component that comes with that as well that we have to be mindful of. And again, as mentioned before, we think about musculoskeletal strain, think about muscle damage, residual fatigue, and perceived exertion, and how that's going to affect us in the next session. Because as we like to say in Athletica, it's the most important session is the next session. So I think it's a good saying to be mindful of and keep in your own repertoire. So HIIT is cool because it can be super precise. It can be like John Rambo, where you can kind of go in like a little Navy SEAL and just be really targeted in your approach, as opposed to the no pain, no gain, catastrophic weapon of mass destruction kind of workout, where you can go in there and just get an aerobic and a neuromuscular workout, but keep the lactate at bay. You can go in there and have an aerobic and anaerobic workout or you can go in guns blazing and get, all three kind of going, depending on how you move the levers of training. Now, I'm not going to get into this, but this is the fundamental, I guess, roadmap that we try to teach within HIIT science. There's all the context stuff that we talked about. There's all the HIIT types, and here's all the formats that I mentioned as well. But perhaps in the interest of time, we're gonna skip over that and just gonna go through the key formats that you'll want to know about as a rowing coach or athlete. So we're gonna move into chapter 4 here, how to manipulate HIIT training and how to move the levers of your HIIT session. So we think here the intensity of the work bout in a HIIT session, how hard you're going in that HIIT session, in that red zone, right? And then for how long. That is the key fundamental component of any given HIIT session, the intensity and the duration of the work bout. That's going to give you the biggest response. But second, in a close second place, is also how much rest or recovery that you have between those. All right, that's and both the intensity of the recovery and the duration of the recovery. This is very much going to influence that response, that aerobic, anaerobic, and lactic and neuromuscular response. Other things that are in there is, the total volume. We always have to be mindful of how much total volume of HIIT we're actually getting. And then there's other componentries that we also need to consider, such as the work modality, right? So we don't have to just do our HIIT sessions rowing. We can also do these, as you probably know, on the bike. And I'm going to show you some good case studies shortly. And then there's other cool factors that you can also manipulate, including your nutritional status in any given session, as well as heat and hypoxia. You can manipulate those into the session. But at the end of the day, we have a lot of different things, levers that we can pull for a stimulus, and then we will get a certain response according to that individual. So this is a very busy slide, but these are those 5 different HIIT sessions that I mentioned. These are the 5 that you learn in HIIT science. We're going to go through just the 2. We're going to go through long intervals and short intervals today. All right, but these are the other different ones. And I think also possibly in the, Joe was actually showing a nice example there of a sprint interval training session for starts. So the start is going to be really critical as we move through to Los Angeles. So, I think maybe even kind of just start there and just mention it. Sprint interval training is like 20 seconds 20 to 30 seconds all out with long recoveries in between, right? So this is that big anaerobic response. Notice the little red and black points there. This is our type 5, right? So very anaerobic, very neuromuscular. All right, these are all out. And you don't do a ton of them because you're going to feel this session. So back to, and again, remember, if you're doing the sprint interval training session, think about tomorrow's session. Are you going to be able to back this up? Make sure you leave a few in the tank. But we'll speak here next on we'll go long interval next, and we'll do short interval after that. So this is in chapter 5 where we start to think about how to fine tune these different ones. The general HIIT science philosophy is what I've just taken you through. Know the athlete, it's in front of you. I'm going to show you some examples shortly. Know the sport that you're gearing up for it. Of course, we're in rowing here. Know the context, the different day, the training plan that's in front of you. Be the admiral, right? That's, sending John Rambo in to do battle. Then figure out the target that you're after. Choose your weapons. These are the weapons. We're going to go through the long interval and the short interval, and then, execute. So let's start with the first weapon, the long interval. All right. So typically with long intervals, we often call these, when I first learned these, as VO2 max intervals. But long intervals are like 2 minutes hard in your red zone, in your VO2 max kind of power or pace. Right. So this is, typically between 95 and 105% of the velocity or power that you would get to at the end of a progressive exercise test. That's what that stands for, VP Inc. test. And then the duration of that work is typically 2 to 5 minutes. Probably, this is definitely, we program these into Athletica because they're important. Specifically, if we think of a 1,500 meter or 2,000 meter row, this is right in the sweet spot of specificity. and probably like right around the intensity as well too, right? With 1 to 4 minutes recovery in between. Recovery being recommended as mostly passive, like towards passive, just turning over. And the reason being is because if we focus our efforts on the work phase, that's the best signal for making those adaptations that we're after. So a lot of, in the past, a lot of coaches have prescribed, recoveries and maintaining that intensity in recovery. The more contemporary thinking is that it's not probably the best way to get the most bang for buck out of your session. So mostly passive, save everything for the next work interval. And that's your typical long interval. Notice the targets that we can hit here. So it can be neuromuscular, definitely anaerobic, look at the red there, and certainly aerobic too. We'll notice, like, here's an athlete, here's Kyle Buckingham, as I coached for the Ironman. You can just hear when we get into these towards the end of these, well, actually it doesn't take too long, right? But I'm not sure if you're picking up any volume, but you can at least see it. So the lungs and the heart are maximally engaged, right? So Kyle's sitting there at 415 watts. He's doing 4 to 6 by 3 minutes is a great one with 2 minutes recovery. But you can just kind of see it right there. Like it's an excellent demonstration. And that's the lactate response, the neuromuscular response. I'm not sure if you picked up the screaming at the end there, right? But that's you can imagine that in the rowing context. Well, let's move into the short interval one. This is the most versatile HIIT weapon, HIIT format that you can use as a coach. And when we think back to the Norwegian method and we think about intensity control, this is incredible. This is because look at all the different ways we can move HIIT around. Like it can be fully aerobic, and we can keep like anaerobic and neuromuscular right at bay with a type 1. It can be, we can just have lactate low, but neuromuscular and aerobic. It can be aerobic and anaerobic, but not neuromuscular. And it can be all guns blazing. It can be a weapon to mass destruction. I'll show you an example in 1 sec. But these are typically a little higher in the intensity, but and the duration is short, between 10 and 60 seconds. And the recovery is similar. It can be between 10 and 60 seconds. And again, those are the two big levers that we're moving here. Notice the intensity 100, and we're just over that last one that we did with the long interval. We're sitting at between 100 and 120% now of the incremental test score. With recovery, again, generally speaking, we want these to be passive so you can focus on the high intensity aspect of the higher. In the rowing context, think about the high stroke rate, and again, think about the the connection between the mind and the important catch, and the application of the force through the full stroke rate. You want to have everything learn, like the whole body, actually the whole athlete learning about that means of moving forward, right, at high stroke rates. So you've got to have recovery and rest between that. So just turning the arms over to move, just to move the whole system out, but really get the athlete, if you're coaching, get the athlete to focus on the effort phase, and really good technique, obviously, through that effort phase to be driving forward, right, at those high stroke rates. So that's the short interval format. The reason why lactate can be so low in this one is due to just a little physiology, but we have, I'm sure everyone's heard of hemoglobin, which is of course the oxygen carrying molecule in the blood, but maybe not everyone has heard of myoglobin. Now, myoglobin is an equivalent molecule that sits in the muscle, and it quickly resaturates. So as soon as you stop your muscles contracting, that allows the oxygenated blood to just rapidly resaturate in there. So if you keep that rest period going and you're passive, again, you don't want to be active, right? Because you want that myoglobin to grab on again to the oxygen. So that kind of, it goes back into there, and we want to do more work at that high rates, right? So yeah, the myoglobin is the reason we can keep the anaerobic component at bay. Remember, we want to continue to do this session again and again. So yeah, that's the reason why the anaerobic component can still be low in this context. And here's the data that supports that. This is from our book and from our papers, but basically we can see different sessions of 10-10, 20-20s, 30-30 short efforts. But as we get longer and longer in the effort phase, it becomes more and more lactic. So it becomes more and more painful. What is remarkable is that even in the 10-10 or 20-20 situation, these athletes are still at VO2 max. Now, when we learned that, we were blown away, Martin and I. We couldn't believe that even though you're just doing these 10-10s with so much recovery, your heart and lungs could still be working maximally. But indeed, they do. And this was known since the 50s with Astrand in the early exercise physiologists. But that's available for us, right? That's why these short intervals are so powerful. That's why we have them programmed within Athletica. So let's look at the great Kiwi pair, and this is credit all of these slides coming up here to my mate Dan Plews, who we worked hand in hand with across the New Zealand program. But when we look to Eric and Hamish, the great Kiwi pair, doing a 40-20 effort here, 470 watts. And I'm going to talk more and more about these guys. These guys are doing a type 3 and type 4 HIIT sessions. It's quite anaerobic, quite neuromuscular. They're going to feel it after this one. I want you to actually see if you can pay attention and look at the different way these two athletes go at their work. Who's going faster? That's going to answer a question in 1 sec.
Hamish.
Good. Well, is you think Hamish? Well, I don't know, maybe, but actually, who's rowing faster? Who's rating faster?
Hamish as well.
No, I don't think so. I don't think Hamish was rating faster.
Yeah, maybe Eric is a little bit shorter. Yeah.
Yeah, he's rating faster. Anyways, yeah, they both row and obviously in the same boat together. But we definitely know that Eric is a fast twitch fighter kind of guy, right? He is an anaerobe. We call him a twitchy athlete. Whereas Hamish also represented New Zealand in the time trial for the Commonwealth Games. I believe he won a medal there, won a bronze medal in the Commonwealth Games. So he's very much an aerobic. He's very much an endurance guy. So it's what is remarkable. What should be remarkable to you is the fact that these guys are so different, but they rowed in the same boat together. So when they were back doing these sessions, yes, they're doing the same session here together, but they didn't actually work up to that. We had more of the shorter intervals for Eric and more of the longer interval work for Hamish, right? And if you like this kind of stuff and you want to learn about it, about the different, how to deliver training programs for different phenotypes, we call them, endurance, speed, or hybrid athletes, please go to our free course on this, 100% free. There's no catches. It's 5-day free email course. Just go to athleteprofilingprimer.com, and basically we teach you the ins and outs of the anaerobic speed and power profile and how to deliver that for different athlete types that you might see. So hopefully you get that down. I'll show that again at the end. But Athlete Profiling Primer. Really cool mini course, 5 days. You'll get emails for 5 days just teaching these things for you. So that's pretty much it for the HIIT science stuff, but I want to finish and end up with a cool case study. Many of you will know of Mahé Drysdale, the great, great singles sculler. And I'll just tell you his story was kind of interesting. And again, was just grateful to be able to try to help problem solve throughout this. But yeah, so when he came to us in 2010, he was, he had the current world's best time, 4 times world champion, 32 years of age, extensive training history, right? So we inherited a legend, of course. But he had a rowing accident in a water skier basically hit him, water skiing, it hit him in 2007. And it really caused his back to seize up, and he had some serious problems. So a lot of inconsistent training, and of course we know the consistency of training is probably the number one key factor that you want in your athletes as they move forward and develop, right? So inconsistent training means you're not signaling anymore, and we're going to be having a problem moving forward, right? So the Olympic dream was, it was questionable, and he was close to retiring when we saw him, because he could not row more than once a day, and that was basically it. So if you're only going to row once a day as an elite, well, what are you going to do, right? Well, he came to us puzzled, and he came to us and said, should we get an altitude tent? Is that the magic bullet for us? Is that the solution? And we said, Mahé, that's not going to do it. That's not going to work. Where an altitude tent is just not going to be the thing that allows you to be at the level that you were at. You've got to train, but you got to train a different way. So what did we do? We turned him into a cyclist, because that's what we knew how to do. But we also had rationale. We knew that the importance of the cardiovascular demands of rowing is substantial, right? Joe outlined it is we've got 70% plus aerobic. So we were going to focus on that. We were going to make his heart the most powerful heart in the business. And the muscles too, of course, that are the lower leg muscles. We were going to work on those as well. And we turn him into a cyclist. So the story is that, we always like to say a cyclist won the last two, or the two Olympics for both London and Rio. That was won by a cyclist. So 51% of his training was with cycling. So across a 1.5 year buildup after he met us. And again, full credit to Dan Plews. I was just kind of sitting in the background, encouraging him to move along with this. But yeah, he was cycling 13 hours a week, plus or minus 4.5 hours, normally consisting of, a long ride on the weekend, 1 to 2 HIIT sessions on the bike, 1 to 2 overgeared strength endurance sessions, and another, aerobic 2 to 3 hour cycling session, right? And of course, then he would row with Dick once a day. But you just 6 days of training in the week and Sunday off. But he was, majority was he was a cyclist that won the Olympics. Yeah. So again, it's just looking at the data. So we have all the data, but it's just, here's where he won the world champs in 2009. This is where things were breaking down, right? In 2010, coming down, came second. And then there's the unstructured training. Here's the effect of that. The fact, if you stop training, the lack of consistency, just the modeling goes down, right? But if you're not training, your theoretical fitness blue line just goes down. So, we train him back up again, right? So, and then he won in 2011, even broke or a collarbone in a bike accident at this point, but still we kept the cycling going, and got him going again. So good story. And again, we repeated that, and he just barely nipped a win in the Rio Games as well. So now on to where does all this get applied? All of these little tricks all get applied in Athletica, and grateful to our early adopters. Martino Goretti is on the call, and his wife Sophie, and has graciously allowed us to sort of have a look into how coaches can work on Athletica with their athletes, and all the various different features that we have. So you can kind of see, so everything is sort of built in here. We've got, the analysis is just remarkable. Our back end team is actually able to kind of look back and look forward. You can just see here, hello, Sophie. We've got, you know, a rowing session planned, 95 minutes today, focusing on aerobic development. And, you know, looking tomorrow, you've got a bike session, you know, scheduled for 2 hours, also focusing on aerobic development. We've got the we didn't even mention this, but we pioneered heart rate variability with Mahé. He was actually the first guy using it. When he got so much success with it, everyone else kind of started using it as well, but also Eric and Hamish. And HRV is all embedded in there, the back end of Athletica as well. So you can just sort of see the analysis, and we're trying to help coaches like Martino who are overwhelmed with all of this data that's coming in, but just being another level or layer of eyes over the science to, you know, because we don't see that that AI is going to take over for coaches. We feel it's a complement. You know, we're like the sports scientists that are trying to complement the coaches. So you can just see the various different things here. We've got the library of sessions from Martino. We've got, and here's the automated programming going on. A very cool feature here with the workout wizard where you've got different options. You know, the short interval example, if you wanted to switch over to a different short interval, that option is there for you. And just, this is remember I showed you that the graphs where we were looking at Mahé's training going down and then building back up again. So that's Bannister's TRIMP model. That's all embedded, and that's one of the key things that drive the algorithms in Athletica. So you can see Sophie's goal here. So we're trying to slowly and progressively build her fitness through there. All right, so you can just sort of see the fitness that's being developed as she moves forward. And then again, there's the heart rate variability happening in the background as well. Heart rate variability, remember, is a response to load. We're all individual this way. So everyone is going to have their own response. And this is where the blanket program, as coaches will know, it doesn't always work for everyone, right? So this is where we hope we can you know, make a contribution is through the individualization of programs for athletes and coaches. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully we have still some time for questions. But yeah, I just want to again thank Joe for the partnership. Thank US Rowing for allowing us to be here, and yeah, please get in contact with me either through HIIT Science or Athletica. And yeah, over to you, Joe.
All right, we've got a bunch of questions that came in during both our presentations. So I'll just kind of work in the order that they came through. And if you have more questions, feel free to start popping those into the Q&A, and we'll continue to answer. I think, Paul, you said you're good for about the next 15 to 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, I've got
Okay.
I've got a good 20, 30 minutes I can do.
Perfect. So first question I got, this is being recorded. I will be publishing it onto the Science of Rowing YouTube channel once I've had a chance to just edit it. But we will be making it publicly available. One of the additional questions I got was, Dr. Dan Plews would characterize rowing as a strength-based sport, given the aerobic nature of the events and the training. Joe, stated that I suspect the anaerobic capabilities are understated or undertrained and emphasizing the need for power. Yeah, so traditionally rowing's classified, again, depending on who you're reading in the literature, either as a strength endurance or a power endurance sport. But if we remember, we go back to that equation in that slide, I had power equals force times velocity. And the underpinning physical quality of any of those things is strength. So you need high levels of strength to produce high levels of force, which is then going to allow you to transfer and be able to produce high levels of power. So strength is kind of the foundation for all physical qualities. If we were talking about a different sport, like on this slide that Paul just put back up, if we were looking at, you know, a track and field athlete, they're going to need high levels of strength because you need fast ground reaction contact times, and then high levels of ground reaction forces going into the ground, right? So different sport, but that quality of strength is still present across the board. Paul, this one's for you. So in the slides that you had, there was it said V/P incremental test power. Dave DeWinter wanted to know, is that comparable to critical power, or is that something else?
It's a little bit different. So it would be this slide, and when we're referring to the velocity power of an incremental test, it's the power that you get to at the end of a progressive exercise test, like an end of a step test that's measuring VO2 max. So it would be, that's the power that we're speaking of. Yeah, so it's kind of like where like VO2 usually plateaus. So if you know the plateau phenomena that you get in a progressive exercise test, it's the power that's associated with that. So it might not be peak power. You might be able to push out, a couple more watts above that, but you're kind of just below that. In terms of the intensity duration spectrum, it would be equivalent to your 5-minute power on the critical power or critical pace curve. And I didn't show those, but those are all available to users in Athletica as well. So the cool thing in Athletica that our developers, an incredible backend team led by Dr. Andrea Zignoli has put in there is that basically when you're just training, going through your training and going through the sessions, you get that critical power, and you can see where all these levels sit within for you, and those get programmed directly into your zones. So the zones get produced based on how you train, right? So and we use kind of like a 7-zone model, but like you're talking to the question, your zone 5 is what you're sort of talking about here. So this would be like your zone 5 on that critical power model. And that's exactly how we use everything. We use everything we do is based off of maximal mean powers or maximal mean paces, and the whole critical velocity or critical power. What do you call it? Algorithms.
Model. Yeah.
Yeah, model. Thank you.
Some quick follow-up questions. So, are you saying not to paddle between intervals? So I think this is directed specifically around passive rest. So would that be for specific HIIT types, in terms of the passive rest, or not to paddle?
Yeah, I would still personally, again, this is going to be a coach preference, an athlete preference. I would still be turning over briefly, moving, but I would make sure that the intensity is rather low, when we look to kind of like the philosophy, because we want to seize on this. We want, this is the 10-second interval, this is the 60-second interval. So here's almost the issue when you're keeping active. So if you're passive, you're going to have the like way more of an the oxygen is gonna come into that cell, in that muscle cell, and be available for ATP production, and you're going to be able to keep lactate at bay. And so the whole idea is that you'll be able to do more time in the anaerobic zone, like the anaerobic speed or the power that you were talking about, Joe. And like we want, again, the way I think about performance and training, I want time on task. I want time at the stroke rate that you mentioned, like the higher stroke rates, because time at those higher stroke rates are going to be what separates me from the others, because I'm going to have that dialed in. And I think, Joe, you were telling me there's some data, and maybe you can expand on this, but there was some data where, winning teams are rating quite high now, and they're working on rating quite high. So I think we want to probably follow that model for Los Angeles.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the things Dr. Valerie Kleshnev covered in our conference earlier this fall. But essentially, the two countries that were atop the medal podium in Paris was Great Britain and the Netherlands, and how they got there was very different. Great Britain was essentially maximal distance, or distance per stroke, whereas the Netherlands took a rating approach, and they rated the highest average stroke rate across 2,000 meters across an Olympic regatta ever. I think it was like 41.2 or 41.5 across 2K. So we know LA 2028 is 1,500 meters. I expect that to only go up.
I agree.
Next question for you, Paul. What is best practice for designing work to rest ratios for the 5 HIIT types? Tabata versus Ranastant versus Balat?
Well, yep. Yeah, it's a good question. And the honest answer is we don't follow the work to rest ratio philosophy per se. We actually just look at time. So the key thing, and it relates to that this is the slide that I wanted. So, well, actually, that is a good slide. Actually, you're talking here like this is a 1-to-1 ratio in all of these ones. But we don't look at that ratio. Like we just look at time, like how much duration do you have in between? And the reason you want duration is because you need duration to trigger the resaturation of the myoglobin. So it's just like when I can't answer your question because I don't follow that philosophy. We don't look per se at a ratio of work to rest. We look at how much rest or recovery this one here is in there, and we just like we know that between like 20 and 30 seconds is good, and of course it always depends on how much work, but we kind of just like if we lengthen this out, like you can have 10 seconds on hard and 20 seconds off, and that is going to be even lower in the lactate response. So how, again, if we look back to the philosophy of sort of how we were gearing up and looking at things, we follow this philosophy. We think of what is the actual physiological target that I want, and then we design the HIIT session in accordance with that. So I don't know if I hope I answered your question, and that's what we do, but it's not a simple ratio answer.
Good. Next question. So I think we'll probably end up tag teaming this one, Paul. So with a collegiate team who can practice 20 hours a week and max 4 hours per day with 2 to 3 strength and conditioning sessions a week, how would you suggest to set up a week in February, March, and April with the championships being in May? So the one thing I would add to this, yeah, I know that's a
that's not a
yeah.
simple answer, is it?
No, it's not. So I guess the added context, coming back to your presentation, the added context to this question, and I know this because I'm working with the University of Kansas women's rowing team for my PhD. So there's periods of the year where they have a 20-hour training week, and then there's also periods where they're down to 8 hours a week. And that's an NCAA rule. And then obviously you have your winter break after the fall semester. So they can provide suggested workouts, but none of that can be mandatory and it cannot be tracked. So there's some of those additional contextual challenges right there. So I've got my thoughts. I'll let you lead off though. I'll probably tackle more of the S&C stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can really totally answer it because it's like
Big question.
well, it's a very detailed question, right? Like I
Yeah.
think and again, this is kind of how we set things up in Athletica, right? Where we've got a certain load model, like I just sort of showed you, and the same sort of thing that we were talking about with Mahé, right? Obviously, Mahé's doing strength training too, right? When we look to Mahé's, but this is sort of where we start. We start with a Bannister's TRIMP model, as just to get an eye on what we might be actually doing. And then that sits in the back of Athletica. Now, the question relates to like what's, here's a month, so here's a standard, what would you recommend in a standard month there? And like I wouldn't I don't necessarily recommend doing anything too much different. I think we follow science-based training, and the idea is that you want that consistent cellular signaling and you want a steady, controlled central nervous system. So these are, so basically, you continue to build, like this is load, and load is like time on stress ultimately, right? So you're continuing to build up the amount of stress and load that the athlete can tolerate at an individual level. That's what I would kind of do. And then, but that also goes to the strength training stuff too, right? Like if we can continue to lift more tonnage or have more explosive movements, then I like to kind of progress everything. Like nothing, I don't like to wall up an athlete with anything. I like to progress everything. And that's very individual.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that through the winter, I would try to, if you can, get in those 3 S&C sessions a week. And then once you get to the period around like late February, March, where at that point you're, depending on where you are in the country, you're probably getting ready to get back on the water. I would move towards more of a maintenance phase in the S&C space, just trying to maintain some of those physical qualities you worked on throughout the calendar year. And then you're kind of, now that you've decreased one S&C session, you now have another available session to potentially sprinkle in a little bit more of that higher intensity work that Paul's touched upon.
Yeah, and
Next,
that sounds wise.
next question. How does this apply or change if you are training older masters athletes, so 50+ years of age? Would the same principles apply?
Yeah, short answer is yes. The same human principles apply, but everything is done at a reduced training volume and intensity, right? Or so it's everything is sort of the same, except like there's a different response to load, right? And that's really that's where heart rate variability kind of comes in. It's one marker of a number where you can actually look at the response to load, right? And if you, with heart rate variability, it's giving a picture of your central nervous system and how it is responding to that and handling that exercise stress or all the various different stressors that are in your life. But the principles are the same. Again, if you've got whoever's asked the question, you have a critical power curve, just like Sophie does. Sophie's got an amazing critical power curve, but you, as a starter rower or whatever, you have a critical power too, and a curve too. And we just need to make your training specific to your critical power and specific to your training load. Like, again, looking at what has been done and like, let's not overburden you, but let's give you the right, conditioning stimulus. And then let's make sure that you recover from that. And then let's do it again. That's it at the end of the day.
Paul, I think you already responded to this when you went over the 10-second, 10-second type of interval and how that keeps lactate low via myoglobin. We've covered that, right?
We did. Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay.
So
Okay.
it keeps lactate, just to be clear, it keeps lactate low because it resaturates. The myoglobin is such a quick little molecule to resaturate. And it quickly makes the session more aerobic, right? So it quickly, if you're doing that, lactate will be at bay, which is super cool.
This is probably more of a rowing coach question. So how does one determine the most efficient stroke rate and the most efficient power for a race? So the first thing I would say is you got to be measuring those things. You got to be looking at stroke length and either force or power output. So if we're talking on water, there's different on water instrumentation systems like the Peach system, the Empower or Lock. I think
Well,
there's
maybe
Sport.
Martino might
Yeah.
come on. Martino, would you
Yeah.
unmute yourself and maybe repeat the question for Martino if you're listening, bud?
Yep.
So one more time
Yeah,
the
so
question, Joe.
how does one determine the most efficient stroke rate and the most efficient power for a race?
Yeah, you would say with the instrumentation for sure. And as well, depending on your race tactic and as well your training, because this my opinion. When you do a type of training, maybe or as well for different boat classes, it depends. So has to be, I think,
100%.
a little bit more precise on the point, because there are a lot of things to consider when you want to answer to this question. I mean, what type of rower, what type of training, what type of boats. Yeah.
Great.
Agree.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Martino.
Thanks, Martino. Paul, would VP incremental test be similar to the VP of a 2K?
Yeah, I think it would. I think it'd be very,
Okay.
very similar. I think it would be pretty darn close. Yeah, that's
Okay.
sort of right around the sweet spot, in my experience.
This is probably more, I guess, a talking point to expand upon. So Martino shared that as a coach, one of the things you can adjust on Athletica to your athletes, you can adjust the training program at Athletica to suit even better your athletes, as well as add trainings or modify trainings according to their specific goals.
Yeah, so it was about the fact that I don't know, Paul, maybe you haven't seen, was not clear that when you have the Athletica program, you can as well, if you have the athletes there with you, you can see, okay, we have this training plan, but maybe it's better to change in something else. So you can modify those things in Athletica as a coach.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks for making that clear, Martino.
I think I found as a coach a very useful tool, because it's not that the program is preset completely, but you can like add it when you see stuff, or if you think that this is better or something else is better.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of showing Martino's coaching platform here, and you can see all his library of sessions that he creates himself as a coach. He knows what he wants for his athletes, and he can delete all these Athletica sessions that are automated, and he can put in his own sessions on any given way. The coach knows the context. The self-coached athlete, they know their context.
Yeah.
The AI can only do so much. We've sort of stated our philosophy. We're giving you the best insight that we can, but life gets in the way of everything. And if we don't give you guys the tools to manipulate according to your life, this is where good coaches really come in, who have the experience and they know what to do when life gets in the way. This is the value of the coach.
Yeah,
So,
because well, you were mentioning that the Athletica doesn't cancel the work of a coach, but it just facilitated. And for me, that was the most important part. That is a help if you follow the philosophy of training, but as well, it doesn't cancel my work with my athletes.
Exactly.
Awesome. Paul, how does the science for HIIT complement high volume, low intensity? So it sounds like potentially more of a polarized approach, I think.
Yeah. This is, so I actually just did on the Training Science podcast that Joe and Alex were just on. Well, the one that follows behind that one was one I recorded yesterday with my colleague Martin, and we were reflecting on how, we were kind of writing this, we're a little biased towards the HIIT, but in this last year for both of us, we have really appreciated more and more the science behind the importance of the low intensity training, the aerobic training. The aerobic training that you do, it basically makes the high intensity training work. And if you all of a sudden, you kind of can't get away without it. If you just do the high intensity sessions, you just, for whatever reason, you don't get the same adaptations. And Ingvild Auden was another podcast that I did. She's done this amazing study in Norway with all of these cyclists at this Norwegian school where every single session is done with a VO2 max cart where they're hooked up to it. It's absolutely incredible. But they've shown basically the importance, and when they broke down the two groups of the cyclists that were adapting versus those that weren't at high intensities, it showed that those that were adapting were the ones that did the low exercise intensity. They did more volume training. So this is where, and Joe and I were kind of talking off air a little bit about this, but you sort of need pieces of all the stuff that we're talking about here. There's no just one single formula. And this is what I was saying. You can't just do HIIT and expect to do well. You've got to have all these different pieces of the puzzle in play. They all serve a purpose, and you really want to be kind of holistic when you're really trying to if you got your eye on Los Angeles or wherever.
Why Great Britain and Netherlands differ in their approach stroke rate versus distance per stroke? Do you think body types, fiber composition, coaching philosophy, where is this trend going? So I don't want to speak for Alex, he's not here. But I feel confident in saying traditionally, GB, a lot of the development for those rowers was athletes that were producing high levels of power, but the way that they trained them and built them, there was a huge emphasis on strength training. Like these were athletes, especially on the men's side, that when Jürgen Grobler was there, that had a lot of muscle mass. They were big athletes. So you think of your Steve Redgrave, your Matthew Pinsent, James Cracknell. So athletes that were pushing into the 540s for 2K on the erg. Whereas the Netherlands, I think it's been a combination of both the trying to get on top of the podium and taking a little bit of a different tact, because they have, I think, a little bit of a different athlete than GB's had. I don't know if Paul, if you got some additional thoughts on that.
Sorry, man. You know more context than me, so I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay, that's all good. Paul, can you punch up your slide identifying the 5 HIIT types and describe the differences between type 3 versus type 4 and type 5? I don't know if you'd have
Yeah.
time for that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick. But
Sure.
yeah, this is the slide you're referring. So basically the type 1, just I'm not sure if it picks up here in the slide because it's pretty small, but if you the type 1 is very aerobic. So look at the green is really high there. If you're kind of following what I'm showing. The type 2, this is a session where so here in this one it'd be like a session there, like 10 on, 20 off, like that short interval. That's pretty much one of the only ones that's going to do that, right? So you will start breathing hard, aerobic, but the lactate will be quite low. And if you do this on the bike, the neuromuscular stim will be quite low. The type 2 is going to be like aerobic, anaerobic low, but neuromuscular. So here you might have some sort of change of direction in that 10-20 kind of response. The type 3, there's so many that do type 3. Like here's all the formats that you can use, right? So you could do like a long interval program done with the bike, or the short interval. Even the one I showed you with Eric and Hamish would be like a type 3. But if the just keeping the neuromuscular at bay, so no changes of direction, nothing really too forceful. Type 4 is everything. So this is like your typical VO2 max work. Notice all the different formats that you can use in here. There's loads of different ways that you can go about to give yourself a weapon of mass destruction. The type 5 is we went over these like sprint interval training, very anaerobic and neuromuscular, and or repeated sprint training. These are kind of like shorter sprints but repeated. And then type 6 are just like work in the weight room, or absolute like just with very long starts. Joe showed a video with the Chinese doing theirs. If you had super long recovery between that and it was actually quite short. That type of start practice, that would be very like neuromuscular only, but you're keeping it low enough so that the anaerobic stimulus doesn't kind of coming in. So if you just left it at 10 seconds, but maybe you had like a 5 minutes recovery between, that sort of thing. So that'd be neuromuscular only type 6.
I'll come back to this next question. Quick question for you, Paul. Does Athletica have any integrations to fitness apps like Fitbit, Garmin, Whoop, etc.?
Yeah, so we are integrated with both Strava and Garmin. The best integration is currently Garmin. Oh, sorry, and of course, a very important one for this one is also integrated with Concept 2. So we have 3 at the moment, but we're also integrating now with a larger player that is going to be we're going to be getting a lot more integration shortly. Things like Apple Watch and Aura, Whoop, and all those various different ones. So lots of integrations happening in 2025.
Awesome. Question from Rob Stott. Do rowers ever prioritize strength training first? So i.e. first thing in the morning followed by a row. So in my experience, it can be done either way. I think what ends up getting prioritized has a lot to do with where you are in your training block or your training cycle. So if you're coming up towards a race, in my experience, the rowing coaches, the coaching staff, they're going to prioritize the on water work first when the athlete's the freshest and the most recovered. and then we would go and do the weights afterwards, back to back. Having worked in the sport as long as I have, it just works out that way where concurrent training happens a lot, because just in terms of whether you're working in a university environment where there's classes and there's a time crunch, you need to be able to get those things on. And then from that athlete point of view, they also want to get on with their day. So maybe they have, a job that they're working. So it's most conducive to try to block those two types of training together. But you can have success doing them in either order. But it's going to come down to like what's the bigger priority and what are you trying to focus on adaptation wise. Paul, were you involved in any discussions with the Kiwi pair when they decided to stop weight training later in their career? If so, any good anecdotes about how they made that decision?
No, I was not. I was not involved in that conversation. I'm sure my colleague Dan would have been, but
Okay.
yeah, but no, no. I do remember that. Through the grapevine happening and those sorts of things. But they seem to have things in hand. Again, I always, yeah, we have to listen to athletes too. And this is one thing we always try to encourage our athletes to do, and coaches, but athletes especially, is develop your feel. Develop your intuition. Like, listen to others and experts around you, but trust also what you believe is probably right for your body. And I think that can be a really good thing to work on. If you're a coach and listening to that, that can be a really good thing to work on with your athletes. Like, what do you think? Here's what I think, but what do you think? And does it correspond? And should we try something new? And they tried that, and obviously it didn't go too bad for them.
Right on. Paul, a couple more quick questions and I'll come back with some of the bigger ones. So, is Athletica currently integrated with Whoop?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's on. Whoop has an API. It's strictly a manpower sort of thing. We're a small startup at Athletica. It's been a passion project being built since 2015. Very small investment only, very small team. So yeah, on that, if there's any other, if anyone's listening in here and they have pathways to investors, we are currently raising right now because we want to continue to build this and make a better system using all these principles for athletes and coaches.
Awesome. So the follow-up question to that is Athletica currently hiring?
Yes, always interested in hearing from people that want to be involved and can help us. Yeah, so please get in touch. Yeah,
Awesome.
go through hello@athletica.ai, and we will respond. Thank you so much for your interest.
Paul, from Lucas Kitzberger, do you have any literature that shows the speed types respond better to short interval workouts or endurance types to longer ones, or is this just based upon your practical experience?
Yeah, we have a lot of literature. We actually have a course. It's produced by Professor Peter Wand, who is the leader in the field of the anaerobic speed and power reserve. Him, along with Matt Bundle, were the founders of the concept, basically looking at how different phenotypes, how twitchy you are versus how diesel you are, how that needs to be taken into consideration. We've done a full course on that on HIIT Science. I mentioned the free course on that, 5-day free course, athleteprofilingprimer.com. You can learn all about that. And you can learn about the sessions that you want to consider depending on the profile that you have. Again, this kind of comes back to the discussion we were talking about, the power profile. When you know an athlete's power or pace profile, you've got your first insight into what they're good at, right? So if we looked at Eric and Hamish, their profiles completely different. We know that Hamish is an aerobe. He was a bloody time trial champion for New Zealand. We know that Eric is as a hybrid or a twitchy kind of guy. So we've got to give them different training. We've got to optimize to get the most out of that individual. So go to athleteprofilingprimer.com. to learn all about the ins and outs of how you can take advantage of getting insight into the athletes that's sitting in front of you.
Awesome. And then final question, Paul. What would be an example of a game-based HIIT for rowers?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I would have to put my creative hat on, and I would probably pass it over to Martino to ask how he could have some fun with a game-based training. But game-based training or small-sided games is just long interval versions of the sport itself, right? So I would say, like in the cycling context, the game-based training might be something that we do on Velocity, who's like our latest partner with Athletica. Where we're actually doing like fun group sessions on Velocity. I have no doubt that those will be available shortly for online rowing coaching very shortly. I know they're already integrated. VQ Velocity is already integrated into treadmills and running. The cycling is totally taking off, but I'm imagining that Concept 2 and other ergs are going to be involved in that shortly as well. But there would be some sort of a fun game that you could kind of have on there as well to make your long interval interesting.
And we have coastal rowing as well.
That's right, coastal rowing. Good.
There you go.
Actually, for beach sprint, doing game-based training with intervals in running and in jumping in and out of the boat is quite interesting at the moment.
Awesome. There you go. Thanks,
Very
Martina.
good. Well, thanks, everybody. We're going to call it there. That was all the questions we got. So thanks so much for attending.